I don't even have words. 5 of October is Black Day for whole our country. A huge tragedy. Russian terrorists hit a grocery store and a cafe in Groza village, Kharkiv region. A memorial dinner was held in the cafe in honor of the memory of our Ukrainian defender, which is why such a huge number of people gathered in that place. This terrorist attack became the most massive in terms of the number of deaths in the Kharkiv region since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Terrorist Federation. More than 50 dead, among them children. At least 6 children became orphans. The Security Service of Ukraine has already exposed 2 traitors who directed the Russian Iskander missiles to the village of Groza in the Kharkiv region. This means that the Russians knew that ordinary civilians were there, and they killed them on purpose. According to the British government, Russia intends to mine the grain corridor. Rachists may try to lay sea mines along the road of merchant ships sailing from the ports of the Odessa region at the south of Ukraine. Not wanting to openly fire on merchant ships, the Russian terroristic leadership will act insidiously and will try to shift the blame for this onto Ukraine. Also, the occupiers increased their activity on the front line. Along the entire eastern front, the enemy took active offensive actions. The war in Ukraine has entered a new phase. And according to the statement of the British Foreign Minister, the Russian offensive has become more concentrated, and NATO has agreed to supply new and heavy equipment to combat it. Well, Putin has changed his tactics, but not his intentions. He still wants to control all of Ukraine. CNN published one interesting article indicating that spring 2024 is a potential important phase of the war in Ukraine. So there are some main points from this article. Both sides, Ukraine and Russia, use the winter to re-equip. The first F-16 fighter jets, ATACMS missiles and other long-range missiles, besides our domestic production, will be deployed. Ukraine will continue to combine the tactics of a creeping offensive with small groups of infantry and long-range strikes on Russian logistics. Among many Western analysts and officials, there is a sense of impending deadlock, with increasing talk of extending the conflict, the war, until 2025. The Kremlin is preparing to wage war on its territory. Satellite images show that in the Kursk, Bryansk and Belgorod regions of the Russian Terrorist Federation, fortifications have been actively built over the past months. In Kursk, from May to early August 2023, new tranchees were dug. In the Bryansk region, anti-tank barriers appeared near populated areas. And the Belgorod People's Party also found the same things. Further, even more interesting, Russia for the first time admitted that Ukrainian bombers flew 50 kilometers deep into Russian territory, struck an oil storage facility in the Bryansk region, which was used by the Russian army, and then calmly returning back to Ukraine. The investigative committee of the Russian Steel Federation for the first time confirmed that one day, early morning, at the end of April 2022, 2 Ukrainian bombers broke into the territory of the Bryansk region and dropped at least 2 aerial bombs on the territory of an oil loading station, which led to significant destruction. And I have to point out that it's really strong. And by the way, this is the first time when enemy mentioned about losses on its territory as a result of a successful attack by our Ukrainian aircraft. Also, Ukrainian defenders continue to attack the temporarily occupied Crimea. Yes, and it is so effective that the ships of the Russian Black Sea Fleet left occupied Sevastopol due to the threat of being destroyed, and moving to Novorossiysk and Feodosia city. Second day of October, Kiev. and the visiting meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the member state of the European Union took place. Many important issues for Ukraine were discussed: support for our state, sanctions against Russia, integration into the European Union, implementation of the peace formula, and the creation of an international tribunal to punish the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Then on October 11th, President Zelensky already arrived in Belgium. There was a meeting in the Ramstein format. And for the first time during Russia's war against Ukraine, Zelensky himself attended the Ramstein meeting. Among the interesting moments, it became known that the French company signed a contract with Ukraine on the joint production of drones called Aerokmail. And one more thing. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, shortly PACE, supported a resolution in which the world will not recognize the legitimacy of the bunker-mad moth Putin after his term ends in 2024. The Assembly called the Russian aggression against Ukraine proof that dictatorship posed a threat to international peace and the territorial integrity of their neighbors. Like the whole civilized world, I can't help but raise the following topic, because it also has connection with the war in Ukraine. On October 7th, another war shook the world. Israel experienced what Ukraine experiences every day. The morning of Saturday, 7th of October, began with massive shelling of the Jewish state and the breakthrough of the Israel borders by militants of the terroristic organization Hamas. The terrorists entered almost 20 settlements, where they mercilessly killed and tortured the local population and foreign visitors and tourists. The words of the chairman of the Israel political party Ahazon should be mentioned there. Israel and Ukraine have a common enemy. Without Moscow's consent, Hamas militants wouldn't have attacked. Undoubtedly, this is beneficial to Russia. Undoubtedly, it was carried out with its support. The Wall Street Journal writes that before the attack on October 7th, Hamas had detailed maps of settlements and all military bases in Israel. At the same time, the Hamas terrorists didn't have such opportunities, so someone gave it to them on purpose. No Hamas ally, except Russia of course, has experience using drone bombers against modern tanks. Only Russia could teach Hamas this. Look, this is how Hamas launched drones on the territory of Israel. And by the way, very similar to Iranian kamikaze drones. Those that the Russian occupiers launched across Ukraine. Of course, Russia is interested in igniting the war in the Middle East, so that a new source of pain and suffering will weaken world unity, add divisions and contradictions, and thus help Russia destroy freedom in Europe. Moreover, very similar narratives are used by Hamas, similar to what the Russian occupiers say. The Hamas speaker claims that they allegedly didn't kill civilians, and all the bodies and videos evidence are supposedly fakes. The same things that Russian terrorists said about Ukrainian cities Bucha, Irpin, Izum, and others. It is not difficult to guess who is behind those cruel actions of Hamas. Heads of terrorist groups have never visited Ukraine, but in Russia. In Russia, it is a common scene, almost every few months. In fact, Ukraine and Israel have a lot in common, even more than expected, unfortunately. Watch the following video very carefully. On the left, this is what the Russians left behind when they fled from Kyiv. And the right side, it was done by Hamas. The roads of death. Many civilian cars shot by terrorists. They were ordinary people, civilians, children, who were trying to save their lives from terrorists. Yes, like a mass murder on the Zaporizhia highway near Kyiv. Our journalists and law enforcement officials published a map and chronology of the Russian crime, which was committed in March 2022 on the way out of Kyiv. And it is the same that Hamas just did in Israel. Russia is friends with Hamas. I mentioned earlier how people say, "Tell me who your friend is, and I will tell you who you are." And here I will remind you that early the Court of Justice included the Palestinian militant movement Hamas in the European list of terrorist organizations. And here I don't understand at all. How do the actions of Hamas differ from the actions of Russian terrorists on the territory of Ukraine? But you may not looking for an answer to this question, actually, because Hamas and Russia are the same. So why is Russia still not recognized as a terrorist? Why? The war in Israel, the attack on Israel by Hamas, happened precisely because the whole world, all those so-called leaders, so-called global organizations like United Nations, etc., instead of fighting back against Russia, instead of completely blocking Russia, cancel it, isolated it from the whole world as much as possible, finish all imports, export connections, any connections with Russia, what they do? They are very, very worried, just very worried. Of course, our partners help us, really, although very slow and sometimes not in a necessary amount, but at the same time, they continue to cooperate with Russia, with Russian terrorists. It is this impunity of Russia unties the hands of other terrorists and dictators. Well, if the war in Ukraine freezes, Russia may attack other countries in 2028. If Russia is allowed to adapt now, then in 2028 the Kremlin will be able to restore the military potential that Ukrainians have destroyed now. The security of Europe is impossible without the victory of Ukraine. Punishment of Russian criminals for genocide and compensation for an aggressive war. This is justice. So, stay with us, stay with Ukraine, support Ukrainian defenders by any size of the nation. Glory to Ukraine, to our partners, and see you next time on the Yakovlev channel for the more news about war in Ukraine.